What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another brand new episode. Coach Joe here with Heartletics.com, and for today's Words of Wisdom, we're going to be talking all about confidence. And this is such an inspiring story, to be completely honest with you. And the reason why I think it's so important to share with you guys is because, inside of our coaching program at Heartletics, where we just, help guys lose body fat, help them with their mindset, everything like that, we talk a lot about confidence. And so we're going to be going over Gideon and his story, and it's really inspiring for honestly anybody, especially if you're somebody that has heard this story, and I have heard this story multiple times, growing up, but just recently actually diving into it, taking down some notes. It's really encouraging, and once again, it's all about confidence too. Let's face it, like confidence, it's not about what you look on the outside, it's about who you truly are on the inside. I tell our guys all the time at Heartletics, it's not like if you get six-pack abs, all of a sudden you're confident. Because at the end of the day, why is it like physique competitors and bodybuilders, right? Those are the most insecure people out there. If you think about it, they're constantly being judged on how they look. And they look better than, 98% of the entire population, right? They're ripped, they're all in shape, but yet they're also very insecure. True internal state of confidence comes from, what is it that you believe about yourself? And that comes from your heart, that comes from your mindset, that comes from the right words and the right thoughts that you're constantly thinking and affirming to yourself. So for today's episode, diving into Gideon, you're going to learn firsthand how to also just get a different source of confidence within yourself maybe. And once again, before we dive in, I'm not a pastor, I'm not a biblical scholar by any means. I'm just somebody that is really just trying to learn more about the Word of God and having a really fun time doing so and seeing how that's been just shifting my entire life, and more doors are opening up now than ever before. And I always like to say it like this too, is that success leaves clues, and there are hundreds and thousands of great stories inside of the Bible with just different characters and different people, and how it can all be applied to your own day-to-day life. But also success leaves clues. Like there's a lot of hidden gems inside of this Bible, and especially as we dive into Gideon's story all about confidence, there's a lot of hidden gems that I think you're going to like. Now, if let's say you don't know who Gideon is, or you never read that story in the Bible, no worries. I'm going to break this up into just a 5 little part series here right now, just to kind of get you up to date. And then at the very end, I'll kind of give you my my takeaways, right? The bigger picture, what I'm kind of seeing that can really help you with your confidence. Part 1 with Gideon goes like this. He's outside, he's doing some yard work. All of a sudden, he sees the angel of the Lord appear. He's kind of still timid. He doesn't exactly know if this is true or not, if this is, real or not by any means. And I think if we all put ourselves in that situation, of course, we'd be kind of wondering the same thing. Like, is this real? What's going on here? Anyways, the angel of the Lord pretty much tells him, like, hey, we need you. Like, you're the one that's going to help, save Israel, right? And defeat the Midianites and save the Israelites. And at that time, Gideon's like, dude, slow your roll, man. I'm like the weakest one in my clan, the weakest one in my family. Like, you got the wrong guy, right? That's pretty much what he's telling the angel of the Lord. The angel of the Lord says, nope, it's you pretty much. And Gideon still doesn't really believe all of this going on. So what he says is, well, here, let me at least go do something and just stay right here. Like, do something to just prove to me that you're real so much. So he goes inside, he bakes some bread, he gets just some meat, brings it right back out to the angel of the Lord. The angel of the Lord touches it with the end of his staff. And then from there, the meat and the bread, it's on this rock. It gets consumed over by the fire. The angel of the Lord disappears. And that's kind of like that sign right there that, that was real. And that the angel of the Lord was telling Gideon, like, hey, you're going to be the one that's going to save, the Israelites from the Midianites. Part 2, the Lord then tells Gideon, like, hey, go destroy the Baal's altar and cut down the Asher pole that's down in the city. And then basically put and rebuild like a new altar next to it. And, the Lord tells Gideon to take one of his father's, animals for the sacrifice. And so Gideon, like, he's nervous, he's scared, but he's obeying, he's following the Lord's commandments. But still, timid. And I'll explain that here in a little bit because obviously this is all about confidence. So Gideon does that, but he does it in a way where he's like, I don't want people to see me. I'm just this small little boy. I don't really want to, be that guy that's over there with just like a hammer and just tearing down this big old, Baal altar and destroying it, cutting down this Asher pole. So what he does is basically he does it at night, and he asks his servants, I believe 10 of them, to go ahead and help him. So that way it's kind of hidden. Nobody knows that it's him. And that way he can obviously do that, rebuild this altar right next to, the Baal's altar that got destroyed. And then obviously Asher's pole that, he cut down. So he builds this altar, he makes the sacrifice, he puts the animal on top of it, and then boom, he bounces, The next day, though, the whole town, right, they obviously wake up, they see that this altar of Baal has been destroyed, Asher's pole has been cut down, so they're all kind of inspecting it. What's going on here? They kind of put two to two together. They kind of see that the animal is coming from Gideon's father's, house. So the whole town, they kind of suspect that it's Gideon that did this. And so they all go to Gideon's father's house and basically says like, hey, bring your son out here. We got to have a few words with him. AKA, like, we got to kill this dude. He just did this, destroy this huge altar. We can't be having that. That's when, Gideon's father steps outside and basically says like, hey, listen, if that God that you guys are worshiping, if he's real, he's just going to go ahead and kill Gideon. So like, why even bother putting your hands on him? Like, let that God destroy my son pretty much. And the town's, they're obviously upset with everything, but still they're like, all right, cool, whatever. We agree to that. If that's true, it's going to happen. And they actually changed his name from Gideon to Jerubal, right? Which basically means, destroyer of, Baal's altar. So it's you can see in here that just from what I told you in the two quick parts is that Gideon is somebody very timid, but yet what is happening every time he obeys and does something that pretty much is a big step outside of his comfort zone, he's kind of being rewarded. I mean, really think about this. The entire town is there, and they're at Gideon's father's house demanding he comes out. But yet, God has a big part to do with all that, with just, having the confidence for Gideon's father to get out there in front of the crowd and tell everybody like, hey, listen, here's how it is. I mean, that town could have pretty much killed Gideon's dad at that point and ran inside, got Gideon, killed him. So you can see that by Gideon obeying the Lord, by going down there, destroying the altar of Baal and Asher's pole and cutting it down and rebuilding that new altar and putting Gideon's father's animal on there as that sacrifice, he's being rewarded by his life being saved, or hey, worst case scenario, he gets his name changed, but it's like it's a slap on the wrist, honestly. Those guys are probably furious, especially if that's an idol that they've been worshiping and bowing down to for years. I mean, think about it. Like, this is really something behind the scenes, a little hidden gem that at least what I read, where, God saved Gideon's life and Gideon's family's life, if you think about it, by having that town just understand, like, okay, we understand if it is, in Baal's, works, and if he's upset, he will kill Gideon. We don't have to. So it's like, God had a big part to do with that, even though that's not even being said. Part 3. So now Gideon receives the Spirit of the Lord, and he sounds out the trumpets. He gathers a bunch of guys, to go help him to, go on this quest, to go fight all these different wars, all these different battles, in order to save the Israelites from the Midianites. And one night, this is actually pretty funny. I mean, this is, when I remember reading this, I think way back in school, or one of the teachers was saying it, and it never really clicked until now in my early 30s. But it's actually really funny, okay? So God is an all-powerful God. God works in mysterious ways. And so with Gideon, remember, he's so timid. He's this, said he's the weakest in his clan, weakest in his family. So he's still scared. He's going off. He's getting all these guys. And you got to think, put yourself in his shoes. Like this small little, kid, like not really big, macho, manly, confident, and yet he has all these guys with him, and he's getting ready to go fight this battle pretty much. So what does anybody else do in that situation? They're probably going to be very fearful, And, Gideon believes in God, so he's praying to God. I know I definitely would be, because I'm like, all right, what's going on here? Like, am I going to be going out to war and pretty much dying tomorrow or something like that? Like, it's nerve-wracking. So Gideon prays to God, and this is like the really cool part. So Gideon basically has this fleece, and he says, hey, God, prove to me, right? Give me a sign that, I'm going to win these wars. I'm going to win these battles. I'm going to be okay. I'm not going to have any, scratches or any damages, anything like this. And so what Gideon does is he basically has, where he says, I'm going to put, my fleece down. And it's just so funny because it's like he's demanding from God, okay, this is what I want you to do. And he's making it like mentally, right? As humans, we're trying to make this like, okay, this is never going to work, right? So it's like working. It's so funny because he's trying to trick God at this point. And you got to really look into this. He's trying to trick God and just say like, God, you're wrong, right? Like, you're wrong. I'm not the right guy, So what he does is he takes off his fleece and he basically tells God like, hey, the next morning when I wake up, I want the ground to be dry, okay? But I want the fleece to be covered with dew. And obviously if you wake up in the morning, right, like, it's all over the grass, everything like that. What are the odds of just somebody's fleece, like their jacket, being covered in all this dew, this moisture, but yet the ground all around it is completely dry? So Gideon puts this fleece out there and, he's trying to make it seem like it's impossible. But you got to remember, right? Matthew 19:26, with God, all things are possible. And so what happens? He wakes up, and sure enough, the whole entire ground doesn't have any dew on it at all, but his fleece does. He wrings it out. It's a big bucket full of it. Still, though, right? Gideon doesn't believe, and he's still doubting God, right? He's still doubting, like, oh man, am I the right guy for this? So you're seeing here that he's started off not confident, starting to build up a little confidence, but now really starting to question himself. And how many times have you been in that position as well? Where it's like you're starting to gain confidence in something. Maybe it's your health and fitness journey where you're starting to see some results, but you're still kind of doubting. Like, oh man, like it's called a self-limiting belief for a reason, right? And it typically holds us back. We like to say it's the bad wolf, right? It's the one that's feeding us our lies, these doubts and negativity, discouragement, everything like that. So I love this part where Gideon then tells God, right, the next night, right, he tells him like, hey, thanks, right, for proving that, but one more request. I'm going to put out, right, my fleece again, and I want the entire ground to be covered, right, in dew, but not my fleece this time. So complete opposite. And remember, right, Gideon at this point is trying to prove the impossible. Like, all right, you really have to show me a sign here, God, that this is you. But keep in mind this Bible verse, right? Matthew 19:26. With God, all things are possible. So what happens the next morning? Gideon wakes up. Sure enough, the entire ground has dew on it except for the fleece. Part 4. So now with Gideon understanding, having full confidence that, all right, God's given him all these signs, like they're going to win this war. The Lord then tells Gideon, like, dude, hey, listen, your army's way too big. We got to cut this thing down. I believe they had 32,000 men total in the very beginning. Then 10,000 men left, and then the remaining, 22,000 men or 20,000 men, they had them all go down to the river, to get some water. And pretty much how they drank that water, whether it was like, putting their face down or whether it's putting their hands up like this, just depending on how they drank the water, they were either going to go back home or they were going to go fight in this war. And so what happens is that all the men that end up drinking the water a certain way was a total of 300. So you have this huge military, right? Or I should say semi-huge compared to these huge battles and wars that Gideon then goes on to face, of 32,000 men, and it gets condensed to 300 men total. Like, that's just mind blown. So they're getting ready to attack, and go into battle on one of these wars, okay? The Lord then tells pretty much Gideon at night, after they got done setting up camp and they can, obviously there's going to be a war, right? And maybe the next few days or something like that. They're just kind of preparing themselves. They just got there. They just set up their camp, okay? The Lord then tells Gideon pretty much like, hey, we're going into battle. like tonight it's going down. And this is like the funniest part that I just truly love. So God tells Gideon, he pretty much says like, hey, I'm going to give you, victory over the Midianites. But then he says this. He says, if you're afraid, go down, to the camp with your servants and overhear some of the conversations. And so it's like, if you think about that, right? God's doing all these signs, speaking with you. He's showing you all these different things, like how he is with Gideon. And then it's just another thing of reassurance, right? Where God didn't have to say that, but yet he knew for a fact where Gideon's heart was, and it's probably still scared and timid. So instead of, him waiting for Gideon to say, all right, give me another, let's test things out. Like, I'm sure I'm the right guy. No, God steps up first and says pretty much like, hey, if you're afraid, which I know you are, go down to the camp, overhear some of the conversations, bring your servant with you, so that way you'll be all right. They can overhear that conversation as well. And you're going to get all the confidence that you need right there, that you're going to win this war. And sure enough, Gideon goes down there with his servants. He overhears, the enemies kind of talking. One of them is talking about his dream and how, Gideon's going to go in there and destroy everybody. And that pretty much gives Gideon the confidence right there, where it's like, how do we put this into today? Let's say somebody signs up for our coaching program and first 3-4 weeks, they're crushing it, right? They're absolutely crushing it. They're seeing the number on the scale go down. They're feeling better, everything like this. But, right, we always say it like this, metabolic adaptation, that's a thing, right? That is a real thing. And so typically we know as coaches, just from experience from doing this from, past several years and helping out thousands of members, we can kind of see the trends of like when somebody's going to hit a stall in their body fat and their weights, just kind of figure things out. So we'll typically educate somebody, right? Maybe doing a check-in or talking to them on a Zoom call, something like that. We'll typically educate somebody like, hey, just so you know, like let's say the guy's name is John. Hey, John, it's been 3 weeks in a row. You've been absolutely crushing it, but just giving you a heads up, brother, that, sometime within week 4, week 5, you might hit this little stall. Don't worry, though. If you do, it's A-okay. We know exactly the adjustments to make. We'll increase your protein. We'll decrease a little bit on maybe the fats and the carbs, offset the calories if needed, or, hey, maybe we might add in like a step habit or something like that, just so that way there's some offset with activity. So if you think about that, it's same thing kind of applies to this, where like God is pretty much saying like, hey, if you're afraid, even though I know you are, go down here, listen to this camp, you're going to find out the answers. You're going to get your confidence right back. It's going to be A-okay. It's almost very similar to, let's say, a client, once again, a coach is telling them like, hey, you've been crushing it, but just so you know, this is going to happen. Don't be afraid. It's okay. It happens to everybody. Nobody just sees the number on the scale go down every single week. It's okay. We have a plan. This is what we're going to do, right? And so if that does happen, there's a plan, and what does that do? That gives that client that's been crushing it for the past several weeks, where if they do step on that scale, let's say the following day or two, and the number doesn't move, instead of them being all worried and doubtful and feeding the bad wolf and feeding into the lies and thinking, oh man, I got signed up for this program and here I am, I'm not going to see any results, they feel more confident knowing the simple fact of, oh wow, these coaches told me this was going to happen. So it's like everything, once again, that the Bible shares. I know some people like to say, oh man, that's so old school, the Bible. Like, what's the point of even reading it? It is more relevant in today's times more than ever. I'm a firm believer of that. But success leaves clues. You can always pick things up from this, and everybody sees it from a different perspective. And once again, this is my perspective. I'm not a pastor, not a biblical scholar. I'm just somebody that, once again, is just on this journey of filling up my cups to become the best version of myself. And that means, my physical health, my mental health, my emotional health, and my spiritual health. So Gideon and his servant then go back to their camp, and, they basically round up all the troops. They have the 300 guys there. They break them up into 3 different companies of 100 men each. They surround the big, enemy camp that they have there, and all the 300 men had trumpets. They had jars in their hand. They pretty much all blew the trumpets all at once, smashed the jars that were in their hand as well. And it says here in Judges 7:22, it says, When the 300 trumpets sounded, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords. So it's like that big army of thousands of guys, right? That's surrounded by 300 guys. They all turned on each other, and that's how Gideon and his, army was able to win that battle. Now, the last part to Gideon before we get to the takeaway. So Gideon then goes on to fighting in even more battles, even more wars, becoming this superior king, this ruler. I mean, literally, the dude he did some brutal stuff to people, right? I'll say it like that. He captured these elders. He, killed these certain people, put them on poles. I mean, he destroyed this whole entire tower, the Tower of Penuel, and, burned all the men. It was brutal, right? It was wild. And once again, the reason why I'm giving you the long story short of all this, I mean, there's a lot of more details to this, but think in the very beginning, part 1 of Gideon that I mentioned. He was very scared, very timid, weak. He even told the angel of the Lord, like, hey, I'm the weakest one in my clan and the weakest one in my family. You got the wrong guy. And here he is, just like an assassin, just like a destroyer, just, destroying all these battles. And so you can see from what I've been telling you is like, how does somebody go from this to this? Well, how does somebody, have confidence? It's from competence. His first time ever going to battle, remember, he was, telling the Lord, like, hey, I'm going to put down my fleece and trying to prove the impossible. Like, this ain't going to happen. And then did it again, the complete opposite with the fleece, and the duo that's all around. And it's just like, you get to then Gideon over here, once again, ruthlessly killing people, and eventually, right, killing and destroying the kings of the Midianites, right, and saving the Israelites. And how do we get to that from where we started at? Competence, right? Competence, competence, competence. That's what equals confidence. Well, how are you going to get anything in life, right, with having more competence, having more confidence in something? It usually involves you getting reps in. So it's like the same thing if somebody's scared to go to the gym because they don't like the way that they look, but they decide to maybe show up the first few sessions with maybe their friend that they feel comfortable with. And who knows, maybe they're not in the weight room, maybe they're just doing the cardio stuff over there. But the more that person goes, maybe they start building confidence within themselves. To where eventually they start, can go to the gym without having their buddy because they feel comfortable. They feel more confident, more reps. Eventually, maybe they're in the weight room, right? Where they started off as, pretty much on the treadmills all by themselves. Now they're lifting weights. And it's doing so from, once again, having more reps, competence, doing something over and over and over and over again. Napoleon Hill talks about in his book, Outwitting the Devil, is that repetition is the mother of all learning. Michael Jordan didn't become the greatest basketball player of all time just by sitting on the couch and watching basketball games. No, he was out there practicing. He was playing in the games. He was performing, right? And he was working on his craft. And that right there, right, that competence equals the confidence. After Gideon then defeats the Midianites, the Israelites said pretty much like, hey, be our king, rule over me. Gideon then replies, he's like, hey, I'm not going to rule over you. My son's not even going to rule over you. The Lord is going to rule over you. Gideon then stays there for about 40 years. He had multiple wives, 70 sons. Gideon then dies. The Israelites go back to creating another like Baal altar and going pretty much back to their old ways. Gideon's son, pretty much like all of them, all 70 of them, they brutal death, except for like one that like escaped. I don't feel too knowledgeable or, confident within myself to be sharing with you, what happened after Gideon died in terms of like everything that happened. That's not today's video, Today's video is when Gideon was alive and how he started off as like this weak, young man and progressing to just this, all-time ruler, ruthless ruler with some of the things that he did. How does somebody go from this to this? And that's why I want to share with you my takeaways to kind of give you a different perspective to just maybe help you. Putting this back to a health and fitness analogy, it's like the same thing if you have somebody that, let's say, they don't believe in themselves because maybe they've been feeding the bad wolf, making unhealthy decisions, whether that's training, whether that's nutrition, whatever the case may be. And let's say that this has been going on for 20 plus years, okay? It's going to be very hard if somebody was just going to all of a sudden, like a random guy on the street, come up to him and say, hey, listen, just so you know, like you're going to look amazing in 2 years and have six-pack abs. That person's not going to believe that. I mean, just put yourself in that shoes. That's kind of similar in terms of how I'm seeing it when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon and pretty much told him, like, hey, you're going to save the Israelites. Once again, Gideon at that time, he didn't believe it. You know, he was like, dude, you see me? Just like if somebody was out of shape and they have been for a long time, right? Maybe they're 50% body fat, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. They're like, dude, me, six-pack abs in 2 years, you see me? Like, they can't, it's not even a reality to them, not even close. They can't even imagine that. So we can all relate and put ourselves in that situation because in anything, whether it's health and fitness or something, there's been times where we had a lot of doubt. But you see throughout that entire story with Gideon, pretty much, even at times, he's still doubting God, right? With the fleece, right? That happened twice, you know? Still doubting God. But then what happens, right? God is always showing to Gideon, like, hey, I'm in control, right? With me, all things are possible. I got this. Just listen to me. And in doing so, right, gets, Gideon all the way up to, this big battle scene. And even tells him, like, listen, I pretty much know for a fact you're not going to believe what I'm going to tell you about us going into war, that's going to happen. But just because I know you're not going to believe me, like, why don't you go sneak off to that camp, overhear that conversation, and then, that way you can get some confidence within that. And I just find that so funny that, like, God always works in mysterious ways. And in terms of, like, somebody struggling on their health and fitness journey, it's like one of these things where we sometimes can't see the next steps because we're so focused on the goal. And with Gideon, right, big goal, save the Israelites. But what happens? He still, right, is wondering, is this possible? Can I actually do that? Like, and it's the same thing with somebody that's struggling on their health and fitness journey where they're wondering themselves, is this possible? Can I actually, get six-pack abs in 2 years? Can I actually get off my medications? Can I actually do this, right? There's a lot of self-doubt because they have these self-limiting beliefs based upon the story that they have told themselves. What is the story? Well, if you think about it, the first thing really Gideon says to the angel of the Lord is like, dude, you got the wrong guy. I'm weak. I'm the weakest one of my clan, weakest one of my family. He doesn't really say anything else. Like immediately just, and if you think about it, that's the story that Gideon was telling himself constantly to his head. I'm the weakest one. I'm the weakest one. I'm the weakest one. What happens at the very end? Gideon becomes the strongest one. Gideon becomes the one that saves the Israelites. Somebody can look at that big goal of, I'm 50% body fat right now and I want to be, 10% body fat and six-pack abs. They can look at that big goal and get very, very discouraged. We all will. Right? Plain and simple. Gideon definitely will, right? And he did because he was so focused on the big task, the big goal, that he's forgetting about the small little things that God is doing to prove his trust, right? And the whole bigger picture, at least what I'm seeing this is, you got to trust the process. You have to trust the process. Even if something is so big and out there and this huge goal, you still have to have faith. You still have to trust the process. Because, Gideon eventually got to his goal. Same thing with somebody struggling on their health and fitness journey. As long as they don't give up, they will eventually get to their goal. But it's like the things that's happening along the way, Gideon eventually gets easier, right? If you hear like near the end, he's winning all these battles, he's doing all these things, he's crushing and killing all these people, right? Completely different person than when we started off with Gideon. Very weak and, even expressed that he's the weakest one in his clan, weakest one in his, family. He eventually gets his identity shift. Well, how does he get that identity shift? Remember, it's in the reps. Competence equals confidence. Gideon was putting his faith and trust in God, getting his confidence from them, even at times when he wasn't necessarily believing it. Like, take, for example, the coats. And then, obviously, God still knowing before Gideon, like, dude, you don't believe me. You're going to be afraid. Just go sneak off the camp. Go over here. That, like, that's going to be your sign right there. This is speaking so loud and clear to me. And hopefully it is for you guys as well that's, listening to this. Because when you're deciding to finally put your faith and trust, okay, it takes the burden off you, but also your identity shifts like that. Because then what happens? He won this war, built up more confidence. Won another war, built up more confidence. Won more battles, built up confidence. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Boom, 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 boom. Right? Got to his goal. So if somebody is, let's say, on their health and fitness journey and they have this big goal, you know what helped Gideon? Prayer, faith, trust. Odds are that can help you if your goals are health and fitness. That can help you with your goals if it's business, relationships, anything. And I'll repeat that again. Prayer, faith, trust. It doesn't have to be that hard to read up on the Bible, right? It just requires action with opening it up and actually reading it, being open-minded, right? Taking things from maybe a different perspective, kind of like how I'm seeing this with Gideon, where it's like, this is like the underdog story, where how he just changes and makes this huge identity shift because of his confidence. But that confidence, right, it happened from the competence of putting in the reps. And in the midst of doing all that, he still needed to put his confidence in God. He still needed to put his faith and trust in God. But it wasn't until, once again, like after that happened, after God tells him, hey, go out there, and blow out the trumpets, everything like that, destroy all these guys. And he sees God's work firsthand with that whole entire, army turning their swords against each other. The 300 guys, destroying thousands of guys, right? He sees that firsthand. From there, doesn't really have that doubt anymore. It's like it was that light bulb effect. It was that, oh, I got this. So my encouragement for you is maybe you don't have that light bulb effect right now with your goals. And that's okay. But sure enough, prayer, faith, trust. It's going to come, right? Like I'm going to make a video about this, talking about your will versus God's will. When you decide to just realize, man, it's in God's perfect timing, God's will, not mine, I tell you what, you want to talk about really improving somebody's health, start thinking in terms of that, because it takes so much stress off your plate, and that lowers your cortisol levels down. You get better sleep, you get better peace of mind, you get better workouts, everything's better, right? So just keep that in mind, and hopefully, once again, you guys felt inspired and encouraged by today's, message, just my perspective. Not a pastor, not a biblical scholar by any means, just somebody that is, reading this Holy Bible and trying my best to help out, not just myself, but whoever is watching these videos as well, with learning how to become the best version of themselves. And I don't mean just physically, but I also mean mentally, emotionally, and spiritually as well. So as always, guys, this has been Coach Joe with Heartletics Podcast. And as always, I'll talk to you guys in the next episode. Peace out, Girl Scouts.